The struggles of John Quincy Adams, fighting for America's soul. In the pantheon of America's early statesmen, few figures are more paradoxical or more fiercely principled than John Quincy Adams. For most Americans, he's a footnote, the sixth president, squeezed forgettably between James Monroe's era of good feelings and Andrew Jackson's populist earthquake. But look closer, and you find a man who spent nearly 70 years from the cradle to the grave wrestling with the nation's deepest contradictions. From the fight for honest diplomacy to the battle against slavery, Adams staked his reputation, health, and relationships on preserving what he believed was the true spirit of the American Republic, a nation that should belong neither to tyrants nor to mobs, but to laws, conscience, and reason. The burden of a name. Born in 1767, John Quincy Adams was quite literally a child of revolution. He was 8 when he watched from a hilltop as cannons roared during the Battle of Bunker Hill. His father, John Adams, was among the first to sign the Declaration of Independence and would become America's second president. From the beginning, young John Quincy was groomed not just for greatness, but for a life of sacrifice to a fragile experiment in self-government. As a boy, he sailed with his father across stormy Atlantic seas to Europe, learning French and Dutch alongside the arts of diplomacy. By adolescence, he was translating for his father in meetings with kings and foreign ministers. He attended Harvard and excelled in law, but was drawn inexorably to public service. By his 20s, he was an ambassador. By his early 30s, a senator. To some, he seemed the prototype of American nobility, brilliant, austere, fiercely honest, and utterly humorless. Yet the same qualities that made him indispensable as a negotiator would often sabotage his popularity. He had an almost Roman sense of duty, a belief that politics should be ruled by principle, not party loyalty. This earned him admiration from old Federalists, but suspicion from the rising generation of frontier Democrats who mistrusted aristocratic heirs. A diplomat first, a president second. Adams's greatest triumphs came before he ever sat in the president's chair. As a diplomat, he wrote the Treaty of Ghent, ending the War of 1812 and securing peace with Britain at a time when America risked disintegration. He then served as Secretary of State under James Monroe, crafting the Monroe Doctrine, the bold declaration that Europe must keep its hands off the Western Hemisphere. Yet his moral clarity did not make him a savvy politician. When Monroe's term ended, Adams faced a four-way brawl for the presidency in 1824. He won not by popular mandate, but by a peculiar twist. No candidate had an electoral majority, so the House of Representatives decided the outcome. Speaker Henry Clay, himself a rival, threw his support behind Adams. Adams then made Clay Secretary of State. To supporters of Andrew Jackson, who had won the most popular votes, this smelled like a corrupt bargain. Adams, who loathed political deals, found himself branded a backroom schemer. His presidency, thus stained from the start, was one of constant siege. He envisioned an ambitious agenda: national roads, canals, a national university, scientific funding. But Jacksonian allies in Congress sabotaged nearly every proposal. Adams, too principled to bribe or flatter, refused to play politics to sway votes. In his eyes, the people's representatives should act for the national good without coaxing. In practice, this made him an isolated figure, a scholar president adrift in an age of rising populism. Crushed but not conquered, defeated by Andrew Jackson in 1828 in a bitter rematch, Adams left office humiliated. His wife, Louisa, fell ill from the stress. Their son spiraled into alcoholism and despair. Many expected the aging statesman to retreat into scholarly obscurity. But Adams's moral fire still burned too hot for retirement. In a remarkable second act, he returned to public life as a Massachusetts congressman in 1830, the only president to ever serve in the House after leaving the White House. Colleagues half his age called him Old Man Eloquent, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with exasperation. He was relentless, argumentative, and increasingly radical about the great evil gnawing at America's conscience: slavery. The gag rule battles. By the 1830s, slavery had become the explosive fault line of American politics. Southern congressmen, desperate to stop the spread of abolitionist sentiment, imposed a gag rule in the House. Any petition mentioning slavery would be automatically tabled, with no debate allowed. It was an assault on the First Amendment, and Adams, a lifelong champion of civil liberties, saw it as an abomination. In defiance, he presented thousands of anti-slavery petitions. Southerners tried repeatedly to censure him. Once they even threatened to expel him. He responded with volcanic oratory and legal traps. Once, when accused of violating the gag rule by presenting a petition supposedly from slaves, he retorted he merely asked if such a petition was in order. He never said he supported it. His opponents fumed while Adams relished their outrage. These battles made him a hero to abolitionists, though he was never an abolitionist in the sense of William Lloyd Garrison or Frederick Douglass. Adams did not believe Congress could abolish slavery where it already existed, but he fiercely defended its right to debate and restrict slavery in new territories. In his mind, the gag rule was not just a procedural trick. It was a test of whether America would muzzle dissent to protect moral rot. Defending the Amistad Africans. One of Adams's most extraordinary moments came near the end of his life, when a group of Africans kidnapped into slavery and shipped on the Spanish schooner Amistad, rebelled, killed the captain, and were captured near Long Island. The Van Buren administration, bowing to Spanish pressure, sought to return them to Cuban slave markets. Abolitionists begged Adams to argue their case before the Supreme Court. He was 73, half-blind, shaky of voice. Yet in 1841, Adams rose in the chamber and delivered an 8-hour plea for the Africans' freedom, weaving together the principles of natural law, the Declaration of Independence, and a scathing rebuke of the federal government's complicity in the slave trade. The court ruled in his favor. The Amistad captives were free. For many, the sight of an old ex-president, half broken but unbowed, championing black freedom in the highest court of the land, was a potent symbol of conscience battling corruption. The last breath of the Republic's watchdog Adams worked until his final breath. On February 21, 1848, he collapsed on the House floor while rising to oppose a motion related to honoring Mexican-American war generals, a conflict he had denounced as a grab for new slave territory. Carried to a speaker's office, he lingered for 2 days and died surrounded by colleagues. His final words were fitting for a man who spent 70 years fighting for what he saw as America's soul. "This is the last of earth. I am content." The measure of his struggle. In his lifetime, John Quincy Adams was often reviled, mocked as haughty and out of touch. He was too moralistic for party machines, too blunt for glad-handing politics, too unyielding for an age that rewarded compromise and patronage. Yet in his stubbornness lay a prophetic vision. He knew that America's survival depended on defending free speech, civil liberties, and the courage to face its original sin, slavery. Today, historians regard Adams as one of the most remarkable Americans ever to serve in public life, a statesman whose career stretched from George Washington to Abraham Lincoln. Though his presidency faltered, his relentless war against slavery's moral and legal stranglehold planted seeds for the Civil War generation that would finally break it. John Quincy Adams's struggles remind us that the true fight for America's soul is not fought only in elections, but in courtrooms, legislatures, and the stubborn voices of conscience that refuse to be silenced, no matter the cost.